All right, hello everybody. Lab 12. This is our last required lab. Lab 13 next week is an optional lab, an extra credit lab. Okay, so this is our last required lab. Okay, let's get right into it here. I'm going to share my screen. All right, let's jump into the instructions. So you will begin by calling lab 11 and executing lab 11. So of course, all your previous labs from lab 5 on through need to be good and correct for lab 12 to work properly. And then spool to your log file. And step 1, first thing we are going to do is create the calendar table, okay? Just don't worry about these notes here. The calendar, so he's got in future refinement this table. Anyway, some notes here that might apply to CIT 325, but not to us because this is our last lab, okay? So just create this table, and as usual, always put the PL/SQL drop code prior to the create table code, okay? So just create this table according to these specifications with these foreign keys and constraints. And then step 2, seed the calendar table. And these are just inserts, okay? So you will have 12 inserts into the calendar table. He doesn't show here a validation query on either of these two steps. However, after step 2, do a select as a validation query, okay? Select, and you can label it step 2 validation. Select star from calendar and see that you have these rows inserted correctly. All right. Okay, that's it for steps 1 and 2. Now, step 3, import and merge a new CSV file. Okay, this will be fairly simple. You've done this before. And so we're going to reuse work that you have previously done to make this simple. Okay? So the notes here, the first CSV file contained incorrect values. So what he's saying here is the first CSV file contained all debit transactions. There were no credit transactions. Those were left out. Okay, so now this transaction upload to table contains the credit transactions. Okay, so we're going to merge those in. We're going to import those in to our database and then add those, insert those into our transaction table. So after doing this, we will have both debit transactions and credit transactions in our transaction table. Okay, so some customers came in for refunds and those were not in the first file. We're now getting those in this second file. Okay. Create the transaction reversal table as qualified below. Okay, so here are the specifications for the transaction reversal table. And then he gives, under the hints here, some instructions about how to do the create table statement for this transaction reversal table. I'm going to give you an alternate way to construct the transaction reversal table. Okay, going back and reusing what we did in Lab 9. Okay. First of all, when you create before you create the transaction reversal table, you must put the PL/SQL drop code as usual for the transaction reversal table. Okay, that must be there first. Then you do the create of the transaction reversal table. When you look here at the specifications of the transaction reversal table, you will see that it is exactly the same as our transaction table. Not the transaction upload, but our transaction table, except there are no constraints except for the primary key. Okay, the primary key is the only constraint on this transaction reversal table. Okay. Yeah, we're not concerned about constraints because we're going to load into this table. Then we're going to take the data, the rows from this table, and insert those into the transaction table, add those to the transaction table, and that's where we will actually use the data. So this is an intermediate table, right? A temporary table for us to bring in the data. So that's why we don't have constraints on here. Okay, so if you come down here and you click on the hints for creating transaction reversal, it will open up here, and he gives you what he calls some tricks and techniques for querying the data dictionary to basically extract from the data dictionary the structure of the transaction table, and then use that structure to do your insert. Okay, so you can go through this, and it's good to know what the transaction or the data dictionary, the system tables, what they contain and how to use those. But what we're going to do is go to Lab 9, okay? So I'm going to pause right here and on the lab instructions here, and we're going to go to look at Lab 9 to help us construct this transaction reversal table and load it, and we're going to use two parts. Okay, so in Lab 9, go to your Lab 9 file, look for your transaction table, your create table transaction. Okay, and first of all, you want to have your PL/SQL drop code. Now this is going to be your transaction reversal table. Okay, so you will see that the specification for the transaction reversal is exactly the same as the specifications for the transaction table. So what you can do is copy this, okay? So copy this and again include the PL/SQL drop code and copy this into your lab 12. And then take out, you want to leave the primary key, but you want to take out the rest of the constraints, okay? So take out the not null constraints and the foreign key constraints. And your last line then would be this last update date with a data type of date, okay? So you take that and you copy that into your lab 12, okay? And that will give you your specifications for the transaction reversal table. And again, note that it is the same and that this is a number data type just like in the transaction table, not float, okay? Okay, so we took this create table transaction and we're calling it now create table transaction reversal, and we've copied this into our lab 12 down here to where it says date. And now we go down further in our lab 9 to the end of lab 9 where we do the load into the transaction upload table. Okay, so here's our create transaction upload table, and this is the table we loaded from our CSV file, right? And that's what we're doing again with transaction reversal. We're loading it from a CSV file, and so what we do here is take the from here where it says organization external, now copy this all the way down to the end, reject limit unlimited. So copy that and now paste that into your lab 12 right under the data line, right? So the last update date data type is date, and then paste this organization external right under it, okay? Because we're loading from that from the other CSV file. So now what do we need to change in here? So the default directory is this upload directory. Is the file in there? Yes. So you don't need to copy the file from anywhere. It is there. It is already there. And we will go and look at that, okay? So if you go into a terminal window and into your Linux there, and you can see I went to the directory app Oracle upload, listed the files. Here's the transaction upload CSV, the first one that we used, and now here's the one transaction upload to.csv is the second one that we're going to use. Okay, so that's already in your VM in that upload directory. Okay, so so we're good. We're good so far. Okay, so the directory upload, these parameters stay the same. We can use these same names here, the same fields terminated by. Be careful again of this optionally enclosed by. This is a double quote, single quote, double quote. And this is all the same down to location, okay? And now the location is the transaction upload to.csv. So you'll need to change that. And then the last line is the same. and we are done. That does it. Okay, so you copy and paste that and append that to your create table transaction reversal specification. And the only thing we needed to change was this name, transactionupload.csv, to transactionupload2.csv. Okay, and then after you paste that in, then you can put into your a comment with a single quote, right, which will then reset your colors, like we had to do in Lab 9 to reset our colors because of this single quote up here in the optionally enclosed by parameter. Okay, so double quote, single quote, double quote, and then you get your colors back by putting that comment in there with a single quote. Okay. All right, so we've done that before. Now we've pieced together these parts into our Lab 12, and that will get you through step 3. So let's go down. Well, not all the way through step 3. Okay, so then we want to insert from the transaction reversal table, take the data from the transaction reversal table and insert it into the transaction table. And this is really a very simple insert. We can use the default signature, meaning we don't need to list the columns of the transaction table because the transaction reversal table is going to line up exactly with the transaction table. And then we do this select from the transaction reversal. Okay, so what do you need to do? You need to do this column list. Okay, so I'm going to, in words, give you what this column list is, and then you can build the code, okay, and test it, make it work. All right. So this column list, we're selecting from the transaction reversal table, so we just list the columns that are in the transaction reversal table, except for 2 things. We'll have 2 things that are different. And the first is the transaction ID. Okay, so we don't want to take the old transaction ID that we just imported because that came from some other database. We need to apply our own transaction ID. So the first thing we select here is we use the sequence generator. Okay, so we select transaction s1.nextval, and that will then generate the transaction ID as the row is inserted right into the transaction table. Okay, so the first thing in our list is transaction s1.nextval, and then we list all of the columns from the transaction reversal table, just all of them, just list all of the columns. You need to make one more change though on the transaction amount, and that's what I put into the announcement, right? And so when you put transaction amount, you need to divide by 1.06, okay? So it's transaction amount divided by 1.06 rather than just transaction amount when you list that column. Okay. So So you should be able to handle that, okay? And then you've got your validation query here. Now selecting from the transaction table and looking at the debit transactions, credit transactions, and all transactions. Okay, so you should have 4,681 debit transactions. That's what we got from the transaction upload table, right, when we did that. And then this new file that we just imported should give you 1,170 credit transactions. And so all the transactions, 5,851. And you can go into the transaction reversal table, do a select, look at what those values are, see what they look like in there. You can go into the transaction table after you do this and look at those credit transactions in there, okay? Now, step 4. Step 4 picks up on Lab 11, step 5, same kind of thing that we did there, okay? So create the following transformation report, and he says by a cross join between transaction and calendar tables, okay? So we're not going to do it that way. We're not going to do a cross join. I'm going to show you the code of how to do this, and then you will need to piece together the code to get it, anyway, to complete it. Okay? So don't worry about these instructions here about the cross join. All right? Okay, this is an ad hoc query, a runtime report that shows income, expenses, and totals for a given year, and we're going to use the year 2009 again. Okay, now again, a review, same business rule. When the payment account number in the transaction table is all ones, that is a debit. On our the payment account number, that's our ledger account ledger number, right? And that account on our ledger, we make money. That's a positive number for us, okay? And then when the payment account is 222 L2s, that is a refund. It says here rental return income. Well, it's refund, a rental refund, okay? All right, and so we're going to use a case statement and sum function to get these numbers for each month in the year 2009. Okay, so here's a specification of the report. We're not going to worry about this annual financial report header. We are just going to make our report look exactly like this output here. So transaction, and then whether it's a debit, a credit, and then the total, and then for each month. And if you scroll out here to the right, you see at the end there is a full year out there, year to date, debits, credit, and then total. Okay, and you note that the total is our net, what we make, right? It, is the debit amount sum minus the credit amount sum, the amount we had to refund, and then that total is what we made for that month. Okay? So how do we construct that table? You click on the hint here, And how do we construct that report, which is a table, right? Because everything in Oracle is a table. Okay. So Brother McLaughlin gives you the essential code here. Okay. And we're going to walk through this so that we understand it. And what he has given you here, you will notice, is for the month of January. So you see right here in line 18, January. Okay, so this code gives you the first column, a hidden column. We're going to do the same thing we did before, where we have a hidden column so that we can order by. And then starting here in line 9 with the LPAD function, all of this is the code that sums the transaction amounts for both debit and credit transactions for the month of January. So once you get this working for January, then you just take this code from line 9 through 18 and you repeat that code for February. So you just now insert it into underneath line 18, right between line 18 and 19, you insert the code again, and you will have then February. You will need to change the transaction date when you extract the month. You'll need to change that from a 1 to a 2 so that you get February, and then give it the column alias of February. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of what this code is doing. Okay, let's look at the from clause here. We're going to now go more in depth into this code and what it's doing, and we start with the from clause, right? Because that's where Oracle starts. Oracle, the selection inside of Oracle, not to be confused with the select clause, but the selection inside of Oracle comes with the tables. Oracle goes to the tables first and selects the data, right, and then applies the where, that's the projection, I'm not sure I got all my terminology correct there. Need to review my terminology. Let's just look at the code. Okay, so you see that we are selecting from the transaction table. And we have a join here to the common lookup table. You do this all the time. It's our only join, and that's so that we can translate from we can look at the common lookup type, which is a foreign key pointer into the common lookup table, and we can look at debit versus credit, whether the transaction type is debit versus credit. Now we also know the transaction type from the transaction account, and I'm going to show you that we're going to rely on that more than this join to the common lookup table. But but that's all you have in your from clause here, is this from the transaction table with the join to the common lookup table on the transaction type equals the common lookup ID, where the common lookup table is transaction and the common lookup column is transaction type. And then that will bring back debit or credit, okay, in that join. Okay. We are going to, and then we group by, because we're summing, we group by. And here's the interesting thing that happens when we group by with a case statement here. So this group by and case, when transaction account is all ones, then debit. When transaction account is all twos, then credit. And that will create two separate rows in our result table. Okay, so in memory, Oracle builds a result table, right? And this case in here in the group by will give us two rows. And note that what do we put into the group by? We put the same things in the group by that we put up here in the select that are not function columns. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to hold that thought and we're going to go and look at the table that we're building again. What are we building? Okay, so here is our first column. We want a header. So our headers are across here, a header of transaction, and then we want 3 rows: debit, credit, and total. Okay, so you see in our group by, we've got up there, we've got debit and credit. That gives us 2 rows. Okay, so how do we get that third row, total? Hold that thought, I will show you, okay? But the exercise initially is to build those first 2 rows, debit and credit, okay? And then we'll figure out how we build the total row. Okay? Now, we learned also in our previous lab that when we're doing a report, to create the headers, we did a nested select. Okay, we did a nested select. So we had an outer select and an inner select. And the inner select, that got all the data for us. And then the outer select structured our headers, put the headers on there for us, right? Had the column aliases that we wanted printed out in that outer select. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to have 2 levels of select, an outer select and an inner select. Okay, so we'll look at the outer select last, which will build the headers for us, and we're looking at the inner select first. Okay, so that's what this code that Brother McLaughlin gives you here is the inner select, and this code here would give you the first 2 columns, the debit credit, the first 2 rows and the first 2 columns. So debit credit, and then for January, the 2520 and the negative 651. Okay, so run that code and see what it does, right? See what it gives you. Now, before we leave this January code, well, we're not going to leave it yet. We're going to actually look at it in more detail here, okay? So we're actually building in our select here 3 columns because we have a hidden column for our sort key for our order by. Okay, so, and we know by our commas here how many, in our select clause, how many columns we have. So we have select and then case, and then here's a comma. So everything in lines 1 through 4 is the first column. Okay, and then lines 5 through 8, that's our second column, but that's our hidden column. And then line 9 through 18 is our third column, our January column, and that one will be printed. So we have 2 columns that will be printed in the output, and our 1 hidden column that we're not going to select in the outer select when we display the values. Okay. Okay. So a case statement: when the transaction account is all ones, then debit. We just want that character string debit to print when the transaction account is all ones, and when the transaction account is all twos, then we want credit to print. And we're going to group by, right? We're going to group by this, and so as Oracle sums everything for us and looks at debit versus credit, Oracle will split out, right, the debit and credit into the 2 rows. Okay, so this builds our first column, and our 2 rows labels our 2 rows debit and credit. Okay, so right here, debit and credit. That's what that code does right there. Okay. Now, our hidden column, we're looking at the same thing. When the transaction account is all ones, then select 1, right? Just the number 1. And when the transaction account is all twos, then just select the number 2, just put the number 2 in there, and then give that an alias of sort key. And then we will use that sort key so that we put the debits first. We guarantee that the debits will be on top, and then the credits will be underneath at the end when we print out and display our report. Okay, so that's the hidden column. And again, in the group by, we have to have both of these columns, and we take them just like they are without the alias names. Okay, so note in the group by down here, they're exactly the same. Those first 2 columns are exactly the same down here as they are up here, except no alias names down here. Okay, alias names up here, transaction account, and sort key. Okay, now our January column. And we'll work from the inside out to see what we are asking Oracle to do in here. Okay. I'm now going to switch to my code. And we're going to continue the discussion, now actually looking at my code because it's a little bit different. Okay, sorry for the scrolling. Okay. Okay, we are working on the inner select, okay? And so here it is, select case, and then exactly what we've talked about so far, okay? Exactly the same as we've talked about. Now we're working on that third column. And you see in, let's see, I actually changed this and wanted to leave this one the same. And this line says when CL dot common lookup type equals debit. This was the line of code in the lab instructions in the blog, right? And let's make sure I got that exactly right. When CL.common lookup type equals debit. Okay. And that is right here in line 14, when CL.common lookup type equals debit. Okay. That is the original line that he gives you. Okay. So you see here that I commented out that line in my code. And the reason I did that is when I ran it like Brother McLaughlin had it in the lab instructions, Oracle did not behave properly and did not perform the multiplication here correctly of the -1. Okay, so you can try that line of code that it gives you and see if the same thing happens to you. But I changed that line of code to look at the transaction account. Okay, when the transaction account equals all ones, then we want the transaction amount, which is a positive amount. Else, and what is the else? The else is when the transaction account is all twos. That's the only other possibility. When the transaction account is all twos, then it's a credit and we want it to be negative, right? We want to subtract that value, and so the else is then take transaction amount times -1. Okay, and that will turn it negative, right? We'll have then a negative amount for the credit. So in our case statement here, two possibilities. One is it's a debit and the transaction account is all ones. We want a positive amount, so just select the transaction amount. And then if not, if it's all twos, then make it negative, and that's our case statement. Okay. Now, let's work our way out here. Okay. So we have another case statement, and because we only want, in this line of code, we only want January in the year 2009. So we do an extract. Okay. So and we do this extract from the transaction date, when we do that extract function on month, it will bring back a number, the number of the month, and January is number 1. Right? And we do an extract of the year, and it will bring back a number for the year, and we are interested in the year 2009. So we say when the month extracted from the transaction date is 1, and the year extracted from the transaction date is 2009, then we want to look at the transaction amount. We're only doing January here, so any other months and any other years, throw those out for now, and just look at January 2009 and get those transaction amounts, positive for debits, negative for credits. Okay, and then we have an end to that case statement. There's no else. Okay, else we don't, for now we don't want that data. Okay. Okay, so we've got our outer case statement here that then ensures that we're only getting January 2009. Now, what do we want to do? We've come back, Oracle's come back with either a positive transaction amount or a negative transaction amount. And we now tell Oracle to sum the transaction amounts. Okay? So all of the January 2009 transaction amounts will be summed, and because of our group by, they will be split into two rows. A debit row for all the positive ones, and a debit sum, right, for all the positive ones, and a credit sum, which is negative for all of the credit ones. Okay, so now we've done the sum here, and now we want that to print out nicely with dollar signs, and we want it formatted. So how do we format? We do that with the character function. Okay, so now coming out, we have our to-char conversion, where we're converting the sums to character, and we are applying this formatting down here. And the 99 with the comma, decimal point, 10 digits long, and then a space, and that gets us our formatted character output. We have one more function to apply here, and that's our left padding function. Okay, so our outermost function here is now take that character string number and left pad it with blanks, right? Put the extra blanks on the left, which will, then move our number, right justify our number. Okay, and then give that column an alias of January. Okay, call that column January. Okay, so let's go back and see in our report, here, what we're supposed to get. All right, so there was no dollar sign in our formatting. There's no dollar sign here, and we see that the numbers are formatted properly with left padding, right? So they're right justified, left padding, and lined up nicely for us here. Okay, so that's what all of those functions around the around summing the transaction amount. So, so back to our code. So in the heart of our code here, we're just getting the transaction amount and summing transaction amounts. Okay, but we are doing some filtering, and we are applying some functions, some formatting functions, by these other operations here, right? The to-char and the lpad. Okay, that gives you January. Okay, So, how do you get February? Well, again, you take this code, right? You copy this code from the LPAD down through the as January, and you paste it underneath. And now you see here again, LPAD to care and all the same code, but now we extract, and we're on the next column, right? We're telling Oracle now the next column. This is the next column. Extract now 2 from the transaction date, the month, and filter where the month is 2 and where the year is 2009. And we're doing the same thing with transaction amount and summing that, and we're calling that now February, and that's our February column, right? So how do we get our March column? We do the same thing, okay? And then we come to let's go back to our report before we look at this code. We then come to the quarterly sum, okay? So F1Q, okay? Our quarterly sum. And so this column right here is the next piece of code that we're looking at. And how do we get, now we want all of these summed. We're not actually adding these values. We are actually telling Oracle, go and look at the whole table again. And each time we do a column, we're telling Oracle, look at the whole table. Only select those that we are telling you to select for this column, and then do that sum. Okay? So Oracle doesn't actually add these values across. We're telling Oracle, go look at the whole table, and now extract the month from the transaction date, and if the month is 1, 2, or 3, then we want that data for this column. So we use the in parameter clause here, in 1, 2, 3, and the year is 2009. Then hold on to that transaction amount. If it's a debit, then leave it positive. If it's credit, turn it negative, and sum those up. Okay? And so Oracle will do that. And for this column, we then say give that an alias of F1Q. All right? So now you know how to do the months, you know how to do the quarters, right? And you just keep building the query on down. And we'll just take a look at the year to date, okay? So you've done through December and through fourth quarter, and now we need that year column, year to date column, right? And so we do the same thing again. Oracle, look at the data. Now just take all the months. We don't filter on month because we want the transaction amount for all the months when Oracle builds this column. And just look at the date, and just if the date's 2009, select that data. If it's not 2009, right, we throw it out. And we now sum across all the months, everything in the year 2009 with the transaction amount positive for a debit and make it negative for a credit, okay? And call that column, give that a column alias of year to date, okay? And there you have it, right? You just piece that together, repeating that code and changing the appropriate parts. important part here is the group by, and you have your, we're grouping by debit and credit, which will give us the two rows. And then our sort key column, our two non-function columns are here in our group by. Okay, so what have we built for our report here? We'll go back to our report. And we have built these two rows for all of the values, all of the sums, all the way across to, let's scroll across here again, to year to date. Okay, so these two rows all the way across, that's the code that we have looked at so far. Okay, now, so we have two more things. We've got this last row, the total column, a total row, and then we have the header row, which is our outer select. We need to look at those two things. Okay, so stick with me here. Won't take us long to look at those two things. What we do now to get that total row is now we're going to do a union all, and we're going to do another select, a whole different select, but we're going to union that with our first select, which built the first two rows, and now this will build our third row, union it, and this third row will show up underneath the first two. So now we start off a little differently. We don't have a case statement here because now we're doing total, and we give it an alias of as account. And we have our hidden column here. We still have to have that. And now we select 3 because we want this one on the bottom. So 3 as the sort key for the hidden column. And then we have then our code again that sums up the transactions. So Oracle, go, and sum up all the transaction amounts again. Okay? And you might think that that is inefficient, but you will see when you run this that it runs lightning fast, and Oracle has its own tricks for how to build this very quickly and sum these transaction amounts again. Okay, so here is the code for the months, and you see that now this is exactly the same code. It's exactly the same code. We're now summing January, okay, and because we're only grouping by total here, we're not grouping by debit and credit. Okay, when we group by debit and credit, that made Oracle split it into 2 rows. We're now just grouping by total. So when we group by total, then Oracle will take this positive transaction amount and this negative transaction amount when it's a credit, and add those two together, right, which results in it's subtracting, right, the total positive amounts subtracted, subtract the then total negative amounts, and you come up with then your net amount for January. Okay, so what does this code do right here? It's exactly the same code, but because of the group by, because the group by is different, and so we should scroll down and look at that group by. Okay. So group by total. Okay, no case statement, group by total, and because of that group by, then we will end up with then this value right here. That's what we've just constructed again. Summing the positives, the negatives, and putting those together. Then we have this as the total for January. Okay, so that's exactly the same code, but it will turn out differently here. Instead of 2 lines, it now really is a total because of the group by. Okay, so what does that tell you that you need to do for this code after the union all? Select total, and now just replicate all of the code from above, all with the LPAD, with January, February, all the way through year to date. Just take all of that, copy it down, and paste it in here, that exact same code. Okay, this is all the exact same code, all the way down to your from, and then your from is the same, and the difference then being your group by the total. Okay, and now you have your order by, and this is an order by 2 means order by the second column, right? Order by 2, order by the second column. The second column is our hidden column, and our hidden column contains a 1, a 2, or a 3. Okay, and so now Oracle will order the rows according to the second column. We could have put sort key here, right? Order by sort key, which is the second column, the hidden column. Okay, that is our inner select, which now what have we done? Let's go look back. Again, now we have built all of this down here. Okay, we built with our union all, we built this third row of those summed values all the way across. So now we have these 3 rows. Now we need our headers, okay, and that's in our outer select. So we'll scroll up here to the very top, okay. So here's our inner select that we just did to get those 3 rows and all of those 15 columns. Now here is our outer select. So now we say select, and our column aliases here. This is what we'll print, and then from, and then our inner select. So what does Oracle do here? So we're selecting transaction account. This is the alias from the inner select. Okay, here is transaction account, that column, right? And so our outer select comes, looks at transaction account, and we'll take these values and then put it under this header transaction, right? This column alias then becomes the header. Okay, so January here is the alias. Down here, referring to that column, then this value, right, will go under this header, the column alias here, Jan, and that's our header, how our header prints out. Okay, so this outer select selects all of the columns that we built except our hidden column, using the aliases that are down in the inner select, and then gives them new aliases right in the outer select aliases. These are the headers column headers that will print. Now, we need to do some formatting because this report is long, lengthwise across the page, right? In fact, it will wrap. But apply some formatting. This is the formatting that I've done here for these columns, and these names match then the outer column alias names here. Okay. And so then Oracle will format those columns according to this specification in the output. Set a line size of 210, and you can play with that and see what that does and what works best for you. Okay. All right. That is everything. Let's go back to our lab instructions one more time. Okay, so when you run that report, that is your validation query, right? You're printing out the report. We don't need any other validation query. And when your report comes out looking like this, then you're done with Lab 12. Okay, so as always, reach out to your peers on the Google Hangout or the discussion board. Reach out to Josh, reach out to me, and we'll get through Lab 12 successfully. All right, I'll conclude for now.